All right, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to session number 250 of Kevin Reed's A Course in Miracles. All righty then, we are in the Manual for Teachers, and today we will focus on question number 4. What are the characteristics of God's teachers? Okay, and today we will just focus on the first characteristic, trust, because everything is built on the trust. Once we have the trust in the Holy Spirit, trust in the oneness, everything else arises. And there are, as Jesus puts it, 10 characteristics. Okay. Let's see. But these characteristics are what are attributed to what Jesus calls advanced teachers of God. Okay, and this development of trust is what brings us up the ladder to being an advanced teacher. All right, like Jesus was an advanced teacher. Okay, Buddha, myriad others. Teachers of the oneness and the innocence. Alrighty then. We'll say, of course I'll say more about that. Alrighty then. Let's just dive in here. What are the characteristics of God's teachers? The surface traits of God's teachers are not all alike. They do not look alike to the body's eyes. They come from vastly different backgrounds. Their experiences of the world vary greatly, and their superficial personalities are quite distinct. Nor at the beginning stages of their functioning as teachers of God have they as yet acquired the deeper characteristics that will establish them as what they are. God gives special gifts to his teachers, because they have a special role in his plan for atonement. Their specialness is, of course, only temporary, set in time as a means of leading out of time. These special gifts, born in the holy relationship toward which the learning-teaching situation is geared, become characteristic of all teachers of God who have advanced in their own learning. In this respect, they are all alike. All right? So these special gifts born in the holy relationship toward which the teaching-learning situation is geared, the holy relationship. All right? So these special gifts become characteristics of all teachers of God who have advanced in their own learning. And in this respect, they are all alike. So all the teachers of God are alike when they come to realize no separate interests, no separation. All right? And this is a process. Okay? And this is how they become all the same. But we begin as we're all different in form. That's what he's talking about. The surface traits of God's teachers are not all alike. All right? They do not look alike to the body's eyes. Right? So they come from everywhere. They look different. It could be a doctor, could be a baseball player, could be a guy sitting on a bench, could be a woman sitting in the subway. Doesn't matter. The form does not matter. Their experiences of the world vary greatly, and their superficial personalities are quite distinct. And personalities is got in quotes, because the form is all illusory. So even though we still believe in the form, all right, he has personalities in quotes, because ultimately there is no personality, there is no form. All right? But for the time being, in time, right, there are different personalities. All right? Nor at the beginning stages of their functioning as teachers have they yet required the deeper characteristics that will establish them as what they are. All right. So we're at the beginning stages, where we've just realized our first awareness that there are no separate interests. All right. Perhaps we have an inkling of the oneness and we want more. All right. That's the beginning stages. That invitation to the Holy Spirit, help me to see correctly in any instance, in any circumstance, right? That puts us on the path to becoming a teacher of God. And we work our way up the ladder, so to speak. Jesus refers to the ladder that separation led you down. All right. The thought of separation, boom, 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 led us to this experience of form. And so we work our way up until we realize there is no form. Okay. And that becomes the scary part. As Ram Dass says, and no matter what spiritual path you're on, there comes that scary moment when you begin to realize that there is no self. All right, but we're skipping ahead here, okay? But that's the top of the ladder. All right? And when that awareness opens up, then we realize all the other characteristics that Jesus mentions here, all the characteristics arise in our awareness. We are that. But in the meantime, all right, all differences, paragraph 2, all differences among the sons of God are temporary. Nevertheless, in time, it can be said that the advanced teachers of God have the following characteristics. Okay? And he's going to begin with the first characteristic, which is trust, which is all we're going to deal with today. So, all differences so he says, look, there's differences in form. Right? Then he tells us that all these differences are temporary because in actuality, there's only the oneness. There's only one. There's only one mind. There was only one thought of God that extended out, which we call the Son of God. All right? So, nevertheless, in time it can be said that the advanced teachers of God have the following characteristics. So even in time, all right, even when we get to the top of the ladder and we're still in time, but we realize that we're not the form, right? Which was, I believe, and what we profess to be Jesus' experience. Right? He did not experience himself as a body. Right? He was at the top of the ladder in form. Right? But he was an advanced teacher of the oneness, of peace, of guiltlessness. Okay. So the first characteristic is trust. Right? This is the foundation on which the ability to fulfill their function rests. Perception is the result of learning. In fact, perception is learning, because cause and effect are never separated. The teachers of God have trust in the world because they have learned it is not governed by the laws the world made up. It is governed by a power that is in them, but not of them. It is this power that keeps all things safe. It is through this power that the teachers of God look on a forgiven world. Right. So, perception is the result of learning. And so what are we teaching ourselves? Are we teaching ourselves that we're separated? So our perception reflects that. Our perception reflects separation, separate interests. You or me, all that competition, all that distrust, and so on and so forth. Right? Or do I learn about the oneness? Do I learn about forgiveness? Do I learn about the inherent goodness in everyone? Do I learn about the fact that we all have the same needs, which is to awaken from this dream, right? The same need to realize our own innocence. Right? When I'm learning that, my perception changes. Even though the form of the world doesn't change. All kinds of nuttiness is still going on. All kinds of cruelty is still going on. It's my perception that has changed. Right? Because cause and effect are never separated. So the cause would be the belief in separation, and the effect would be, I see everything through that lens. Or, I believe in the oneness. I want to see correctly. So I see everything through that lens. Right? So I either trust the ego or the Holy Spirit. Right? I learn to trust the Holy Spirit. Help me to see correctly. I ask him and I trust that he's going to give me the correct perception. Right? This is the power that's in us. Right? The teachers of God have trust in the world because they have learned it is not governed by the laws the world made up. It is governed by a power that is in them, but not of them. And that power is that connection with the Holy Spirit, that connection with unlimited love. Right? We connect with that and we see the world through a different filter. Right? And in that way, we can trust in the world. We can trust that everything in the world is going to reflect the oneness to us. Everything, we're going to see everybody as either extending love or calling for love. And in either case, the response is love. Right? That's the power. Right? To trust in the love, that I will respond with love to whatever the situation is. Every situation, every person is either extending love or calling for love. And I will begin to realize that. And my throat is still dry, folks. So that is the power that is in them, but not of them. Right? I didn't create the power. I go to that power that is. That unconditional, eternal love. It is this power that keeps all things safe. It is through this power that the teachers of God look on a forgiven world. It's because I've gone to the Holy Spirit to connect with the power of love, for lack of a better word. And I am able to see past the form to the goodness in everybody, to the innocence, to the forgiveness. All right. Our perception changes. Paragraph 2, when this power has once been experienced, it is impossible to trust one's own petty strength again. Okay. Who would attempt to fly with the tiny wings of a sparrow when the mighty power of an eagle has been given him? And who would place his faith in the shabby offerings of the ego when the gifts of God are laid before him? Right. The contrast. Once we see the contrast, the gifts of the ego, sin, guilt, fear, projection, right, or the gifts of the oneness, the Holy Spirit, the realization of oneness. And who would place his faith in the shabby offerings of the ego when the gifts of God are laid before him? And then he says, well, what induces us to make that shift? What is it that induces them to make the shift? All right. And what induces us to make this shift, to constantly ask, help me to see correctly, constantly going to the right mind, is that contrast, is becoming aware that, oh yeah, this is the way I'm seeing this is what I'm feeling, because I chose to believe that I'm separated from God. I chose the thought system of the ego. And then you realize, oh, I can choose again. And I can ask the Holy Spirit, help me to see this correctly. Help me to see this through the filter of love and innocence. And you will see it differently. You will experience the world differently in every time you ask. Right? And that becomes the contrast. You remember, oh yeah, I don't want to go down that road. Right? I want to come back to Jesus. No matter how many times you stray, and if you're like me, you will. Okay? That's what the world is for. Just when you think you're out, it pulls you back in. Just another American male quoting the Godfather. Thank you. So what induces them to make the shift? It's the contrast. All right, Jesus and the Holy Spirit, right? They help us to see the contrast between choosing the separation and choosing the oneness, the guilt or the happiness. And we decide, what do I want, guilt or happiness? All right. So that's what induces us to make the shift. And so we get to section A of the idea of trust, and it's called the development of trust. All right. Now, Dr. Wapnick would say, although this is laid out as if it's one step after another, don't take it literally like that. He said these experiences are not, they're not clearly delineated stages. Right? As he would say, you're not finishing in one room and going to the other. All right? You're not finishing one part of the test and going to the next. Right? Things fluctuate, but all along, you're developing your trust so that it becomes ultimate trust, ultimate awareness of the oneness. And then you're rising up the ladder to becoming that advanced teacher of God. So at the beginning stages, we're just teachers of God. We're like rookies. Okay? So, it's the process of climbing the ladder. And that process is letting go of the ego. Right? That's the process. And you can see how the ultimate stage is letting go of the ultimate prize of the ego, which is the self. But we're not there right now. So, the development of trust. First, they must go through what might be called a period of undoing. This need not be painful, but it usually is so experienced. It seems as if things are being taken away, and it is rarely understood initially that their lack of value is merely being recognized. How can lack of value be perceived unless the perceiver is in a position where he must see things in a different light? He is not yet at the point at which he can make the shift entirely internally. And so the plan will sometimes call for changes in what seem to be external circumstances. These changes are always helpful. When the teacher of God has learned that much, he goes on to the second stage. So, it is rarely understood initially, right? Because it seems as though something's being taken away from me. I lost my best friend. I lost my job. All right? I lost my loved one. All right? I lost my pets or my pet. You see, the devastation that some people go through in these natural disasters that are occurring. All right? So it's a period of undoing. It doesn't have to be painful, but hey, listen, if you just lost your house in a fire, that's pretty painful, okay? And initially, it's rarely understood initially, right, that it's the lack of value that's being recognized. So when I'm in that circumstance, it's hard to realize that, okay, I'm only losing the valueless. That's why I need to call on the Holy Spirit to help me to see this, help me to see it correctly. Otherwise, I am just totally tempted and totally succumbing to saying, what the hell, man? What is going on here? Right? My entire neighborhood is wiped out with a tornado or a flood or a fire. Right? The building I live in is gone. You know, what the hell? It's hard to see that without constantly going to Jesus or the Holy Spirit and asking for help. How do I see this through the eyes of peace? How do I see this correctly? All right. So how can a lack of value be perceived unless the perceiver is in a position where he must see things in a different light? Right. So unless I'm willing to go to the Holy Spirit and say, how can I see this correctly? Right. I will still be in that sense of loss and suffering and sacrifice. Right. And there's so many people that get pissed off at their image of God, thinking that God let this happen. It's never the case. God is not the ultimate chess player here. Right? God does not move things around in form. Right? I hope it doesn't bother you, but God doesn't know about form. Right? He only knows about you as perfect innocence. This is why we need to trust the Holy Spirit, trust Jesus, that they will bring us a different perception. Help me to see this correctly. All right. I mean, I know I'm using some extreme examples, but that's the way it is. All right. So it's a period of undoing. We think we're losing things. And it can become quite painful. It's understandable. But the practice is, for those of us who are in the course, following the Course in Miracles teachings and being willing to become teachers of God, we go and trust that the Holy Spirit will help us out here. Help me to see this correctly. And sometimes we're not yet at the point where you can make that shift entirely internally. Right? I just can't automatically shift and see things correctly. I have to keep practicing because I will fluctuate. All right? You know how they talk about waves of sadness come over you. All right? That's the thought of loss comes back. And each time it comes back, I need to go. Help me. Help me to see correctly. All right? And so the plan will sometimes call for changes in what seem to be external circumstances. And he says seem to be because everything in form is ultimately an illusion. Right? So they seem to be external circumstances. We're not there yet. That's where we're bringing ourselves to the Holy Spirit and ask him, help me to see this peacefully. Right? And we're developing the trust in the Holy Spirit, developing the trust in Jesus. Right. So sometimes it'll call for changes in what seem to be external circumstances. He says, these changes are always helpful. When the teacher of God has learned that much, he goes on to the second stage. When the teacher of God has learned that something, I can be peaceful in the midst of this destruction. Then he goes on to the second stage. Next, the teacher of God must go through a period of sorting out. This is always somewhat difficult because having learned that the changes in his life are always helpful, he must now decide all things on the basis of whether they increase the helpfulness or hamper it. He will find that many, if not most of the things he valued before, will merely hinder his ability to transfer what he has learned to new situations as they arise, because he has valued what is really valueless. He will not generalize the lesson for fear of loss and sacrifice. It takes great learning to understand that all things, events, encounters, and circumstances are helpful. It is only to the extent to which they are helpful that any degree of reality should be accorded them in this world of illusion. The word value can apply to nothing else. Right? So the only thing that's valuable is what helps us to realize what is reality. Right? They're only helpful to the extent to which they are helpful to any degree of reality should be accorded them. Right? All right. So this period of sorting out, it's learning what is valuable, what is valueless. And in the text, Jesus reminds us what is valuable is what is eternal. Right? And there is nothing in this world that is eternal. And this is why we need help from the Holy Spirit. Help me to see this correctly. Because I'm not at the point where I can generalize everything in this world is valueless. All right? I still hold on to certain things. And as they arise, I ask Jesus and Holy Spirit for help. All right? I'm strengthening, developing the trust. Okay? So I go through this period of sorting out. This is always somewhat difficult. Somewhat, right? Because having learned that the changes in his life are always helpful, he must now decide all things on the basis of whether they increase the helpfulness or hamper it. All right, I must decide on all things. Is this helping me to realize the oneness? All right. Is this helping me to realize the eternal? And if not, I ask Jesus and the Holy Spirit, help me to see this, whatever it is. Help me to give me corrected perception. All right? And we correct our perceptions about everything we thought was valuable. You don't do it on your own. All right? All right. We must decide all things on the basis of whether they increase the helpfulness or hamper it. He will find that many, if not most of the things he valued before, merely hinder his ability to transfer what he has learned to new situations as they arise. In other words, they hinder my ability to generalize. Right? To generalize everything. Right? In other words, to see everyone the same way. To see no differences. Right? That's generalizing. Right? But not being at that stage, we have to take it piece by piece. And that's okay. Jesus realizes this is a process. All right? And you find that many, if not most of the things you valued, will hinder your ability to transfer what you've learned to new situations. Because what he has valued is really valueless. He will not generalize the lesson for loss, for fear of loss and sacrifice. All right, so I'm reluctant to generalize the lesson for the fear of loss. All right. First of all, I think things are going to be taken away from me, but basically, ultimately, I'm afraid of loss of the individuality, the loss of self, the loss of this entity called Kevin. All right. That's what I'm afraid of letting go of. Well, what's next? All right. That's why we need to progress. We need to develop that ultimate trust of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. All right. And we do that piece by piece. Everything I think, I question everything. And that's what we do, for the rest of your life. And into the next one if you want, if that helps. Okay. He will not recognize, because he has valued what is really valueless, he will not generalize the lesson, right, for fear of loss. So it takes great learning to understand that all things, events, encounters, and circumstances are helpful. So it takes great learning. All right? Jesus at one point says it takes little willingness, but then he says somewhere else it takes great willingness. Now he's telling us it takes great learning. In other words, you have to dedicate yourself to it. You have to, do it. You have to do it. I mean, you don't have to analyze every step you take. All right? You don't have to analyze every move you make. But things that come up when you have a reaction, all right, be willing to learn what is valuable, what is valueless. Be willing to be shown through the eyes of peace. And be dedicated to it. That's the great learning. Right? It takes great learning to understand that all things, events, encounters, and circumstances are helpful. in my experience, we do this in retrospect, all right? Because you realize, oh, that job that I didn't get, or that relationship that I didn't go for, all right? Or a relationship that rejected me, all right? Or a class that I failed in college or something, all right? Anything like that. Or if you failed your driver's test or something, all right? All circumstances are helpful. And then, you know, time goes by and you look back on it and say, oh yeah, it's a good thing I didn't get that job, because now I have this, you know? Or now I'm experiencing this, you know? Alrighty then. I'm still, all of a sudden, bang, 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 I'm still experiencing some regrets, which I'll have to deal with afterwards, all right? So, and that regret is that I don't realize that the choices I made in the past were helpful. All right, I still don't realize that. So they pop up as regrets. And they can have, you know, gradation in the regret. You could be really sad, you could be angry, you know, whatever. But that's just part of the stage of growing and learning. So it takes great learning to understand that everything is helpful. All circumstances are helpful. It is only to the extent to which they are helpful that any degree of reality should be accorded them in this world of illusion. We can only confer a degree of reality to things if they're helpful to us. Otherwise, they're valueless and they're actually not real. And ultimately, nothing in form is real, but they can help us. Right? In other words, as they say, use time to escape from time. All right? Use form to escape from form. Right? So that's the only reason that these experiences could be called valuable, right? Because they have helped us to realize, right, one thing or another. If they're valuable, they helped us to realize, helped us to get closer to the awareness of oneness. The third stage, paragraph 5, the third stage through which the teacher of God must go can be called a period of relinquishment. If this is interpreted as giving up the desirable, it will engender enormous conflict. Few teachers of God escape this distress entirely. There is, however, no point in sorting out the valuable from the valueless unless the next obvious step is taken. Therefore, the period of overlap is apt to be one in which the teacher of God feels called upon to sacrifice his own best interests on behalf of truth. He has not realized as yet how wholly impossible such a demand would be. He can learn this only as he actually does give up the valueless. Through this, he learns that where he anticipated grief, he finds a happy lightheartedness instead. Where he thought something was asked of him, he finds a gift bestowed on him. Right? In other words, I begin to realize there is no sacrifice. This course never calls for sacrifice. Right? There's nothing to be done in order to sacrifice anything. But if I interpret something as, oh, I got to give this up, this is what Jesus wants me to do. Jesus wants me stop this activity or that activity, and as Dr. Wapnick would say, Jesus doesn't want you to do anything, right, except realize your own innocence. Realize the oneness and the innocence of everything else and everyone else. Right? Because if I think I'm giving up something, I have to give up something, that's the conflict. It's like I'm going to do something, but I don't want to. Right? Right? Just like being brought up in the Catholic religion, especially in the 50s. Right? You can't eat meat on Fridays. Right? I feel like you're giving up something. As you get older, that is. I want that burger. No, you can't. It's Friday. I want that hot dog. All right. You do it, but you don't want to do it. I remember I was at a baseball game. Now it's coming up, this memory. And anybody that can remember the Polo Grounds where the New York Giants baseball team used to play, I was there with a friend of mine. We were very young, of course, because the Giants were still playing in the Bronx. And we went up to the concession stand, and my friend gets a hot dog, and he goes, "You want one?" And I said, No, it's Friday. And he looks at me, and we couldn't have been more than 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. And he goes, "You still believe that shit?" And I was like shocked, you know? But that's the dilemma. You think you're giving up something. You're sacrificing something, right? And there's the conflict. I want it, but my religion, Jesus says you can't have it, all right? And then eventually they changed the rules. And as George Carlin would say, imagine all the people in hell on the meat wrap. All right, but now we're getting at the stream of consciousness here. But that's it. I don't want to, but I think I have to. This is what Jesus wants. And that's not it. Like Ken says, Jesus don't want you to do anything. All right? Jesus just wants you to ask the Holy Spirit, help me to see correctly. That's all. And you can take your time. Right? You can take your time in the contrasts. All right? So the third stage is a period of relinquishment when we're giving up the valueless or letting go of the valueless, walking away from it. Right? We're not giving anything up. We're just walking away from realizing it's valueless. All right? But if I think I'm giving up something desirable, I don't want to do that. I'm reluctant. He says it will engender enormous conflict. And few teachers of God escape this distress entirely. There is, however, no point in sorting out the valuable and the valueless unless the next obvious step is taken, which is to walk away from the valueless. All right? Therefore, the period of overlap is apt to be one in which the teacher of God feels called upon to sacrifice his own best interests on the behalf of truth. All right? So when he says there's the overlap, he's implying that there is no really discrete delineation between these stages here. All right? You'll feel it sometimes. All right? So you feel called upon, like, hey, I got to give something up. I hate that sacrifice. All right? So I have not yet realized how wholly impossible such a demand would be. All right? Jesus doesn't demand anything. All right? Jesus doesn't care about form. All right? He can learn this only as he actually does give up the valueless. And through this, he learns that where he anticipated grief, he finds a happy lightheartedness instead. Where he thought something was asked of him, he finds a gift bestowed on him. that lightheartedness, right? That gift of happiness is increasing. All right. I have to tell the story. When my niece was small, she was in grammar school, and in the Catholic Church, of course, we have Lent. So during the period of 40 days of Lent, you're asked to give up something. All right. So the first day of Lent comes, or the day before, I said to my mother, I think, asked, Jess, what are you giving up for Lent? And she goes, oh, tacos. And so I had a cool laugh about that. So the first day of Lent comes, which is the next day, and she comes home from school, and I come in the house and she's rolling on the couch, and I go, Jess, what's wrong? She goes, oh, I want tacos. I want tacos. So I said, okay, Jess, let's see. I said, I really don't think God would be angry with you if you had a taco or two. All right? God never gets angry. I reminded her of that. I said, remember, God is never angry. And so we went and got tacos. All right? And then the next day, she comes to me and she goes, Uncle Kevin, I had a dream last night. She goes, I dreamed that I was having tacos with God. I almost burst into tears. Because that was the realization that there was no guilt. Everything was okay. I just thought it was a wonderful experience. So I had to share that. I always carry that memory with me. Some 25 years later. All right, that's one of the sweetest memories. But that's it. If you think you're asked to sacrifice, you're going to be reluctant. There's going to be a conflict. But once you realize that what you let go of wasn't really valuable at all, didn't really do you that much good, all right? Didn't do you any good outside of form, then you feel a lightheartedness, all right? Just as Jess felt, the guilt was released, all right? There was a lightheartedness. All right, I hope I'm not confusing people. All right, the idea is to trust that the Holy Spirit will guide you correctly. And look, hey, if you really can't give it up right now, you really can't let it go, let me put it that way. If you can't walk away from it, then don't. You're not ready. But you will revisit it at some point. And you can always continue to ask the Holy Spirit and Jesus to help me see things correctly. Right? There's no rush. You just learn by the contrasts. Right? So paragraph 6. Now comes a period of settling down. Right? This is a quiet time in which the teacher of God rests a while in reasonable peace. Now he consolidates his learning. Now he begins to see the transfer value of what he has learned. Its potential is literally staggering. And the teacher of God is now at the point in his progress at which he sees in it his whole way out. Give up what you do not want and keep what you do. How simple is the obvious, and how easy to do. The teacher of God needs this period of respite. He has not yet come as far as he thinks. Yet when he is ready to go on, he goes with mighty companions beside him. Now he rests a while and gathers them before going on. He will not go on from here alone. Okay? So now is the period of settling down. It's a quiet time in which the teacher of God rests in reasonable peace. Reasonable peace. Not the ultimate peace that passes all understanding, but reasonable. All right. Now I realize that I feel better when I ask to see things correctly. All right. And now I can begin to consolidate everything I've learned, all my changes in perceptions, and I can begin to see that I can generalize. I can generalize the value of what I have learned. I've had many instances where my perception was corrected, and I felt that shift, that lightheartedness that the change in perception brings. And now I start to realize that I can generalize that. I can generalize that to everything. This is what he means by I start to realize the potential that is literally staggering. And the teacher of God is now at the point in his progress at which he sees in it his whole way out. If I continue to do this, I see my way out of this dream of sin, guilt, and fear. I see my way out of this responding to this crazy world in a fearful way. The world is not going to change, but my perception of it will change. That's my way out. He says, now you're seeing it the whole way out. Give up what you don't want and keep what you do. So I keep what will help me to realize the oneness. I keep what will help me realize the innocence. I keep what will help me to see everything and everyone as a reflection of the oneness of heaven, as a reflection of love. Because I will see everyone and everything as either calling for love or extending love, in which case the response is always love. How simple is the obvious, and how easy to do. The teacher of God needs this period of respite because he has not yet come as far as he thinks. All right? He's not at the top of the ladder. He's not at the same realization that Jesus had. All right? But he's on his way. He's on her way. All right? Please excuse me for my old-timey adjectives. The teacher of God needs this period of respite, right? Because he has not yet come as far as he thinks. Yet, when he is ready to go on, he goes with mighty companions beside him. And now he rests a while he gathers them. He gathers these companions before going on. He will not go on from here alone. And Dr. Wapnick would always say, everybody wants to know what the names of these companions are. All right? These companions are all your loving thoughts, all your perceptions that have been changed to corrected perception. It is Jesus along with these corrected perceptions. All your loving, positive thoughts. Those are the mighty companions that go with you. And metaphorically, we gather them up before we go on. And we realize that we're not alone. We always have the Holy Spirit and Jesus to turn to. All right? Because we haven't come as far as we think. Because paragraph 7, the next stage is indeed a period of unsettling. Now must the teacher of God understand that he did not really know what was valuable and what was valueless. All he really learned so far was that he did not want the valueless and that he did want the valuable. Yet his own sorting out what was meaningless is teaching him the difference. The idea of sacrifice, so central to his own thought system, had made it impossible for him to judge. He thought he learned willingness, but now he sees that he does not know what the willingness is for. And now he must attain a state that may remain impossible to reach for a long, long time. He must learn to lay all judgment aside and ask only what he really wants in every circumstance. Were not each step in this direction so heavily reinforced, it would be hard indeed. So, metaphorically, what Jesus is describing here is a dark night of the soul. It's a period of unsettling when we're not sure. Right? When we start to understand that I really didn't know what was valuable and what was valueless, because I still am clinging to things. All that he really learned was that he did not want the valueless, right? And that he did want the valuable, right? But I haven't learned completely all the things that are valueless, right? Yet his own sorting out was meaningless in teaching him the difference, right? So if I sort these things out on my own, it doesn't really help me to learn the difference, because the idea of sacrifice is so central to my thought system. Right? It made it impossible for me to judge, for him to judge. He thought he learned willingness, but now he sees that he does not know what the willingness is for. It's all about letting go of the self. Am I willing to let go of this self? Am I willing to realize that I am an abstract thought in the mind of God? Right. So I did not realize what the willingness was all about. Oh no, you didn't tell me that. That's why he says, now he must attain a state, that realization that I am abstract love. Right? This is the state that Jesus had attained. He was in the world, but he knew he wasn't in the world. Right? He was there as a teacher, a bringer of a message. He knew that was his function, to bring on the message of forgiveness and oneness. Right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? But he realized he wasn't here. He realized he was a lucid dreamer, so to speak. And that's the level that we are rising to, all right? That's what he means when he says that now he must attain a state that may remain impossible to reach for a long, long time, because he must learn to lay aside all judgment and ask only what he really wants in every circumstance. Yeah, every circumstance. All right. I must learn to lay all judgment aside, including the judgment that says I exist as an individual. That's why it might take a while. And that's why it takes great learning, right? And persistence. You keep at it, it will dawn on you. All right. It will dawn on you. The oneness will dawn on you. It will dawn on you that you are that, as Gangaji would say. So you must learn to lay aside all judgment. Right? So it's all about letting go of the self. And in the end, there is no I. Right? That's why it might take a while. But keep at it. Right? There's wonderful awarenesses on the way there. And when you get there, it's not frightening. Okay? That's what he means by, were not each step in this direction so heavily reinforced, it would be hard indeed. So every time I'm willing to have my perception corrected, every time I'm willing to help me to see correctly, all right? That's a step that's being reinforced, right? The awareness of oneness is being reinforced. The happiness is being reinforced. The decrease in fear is being reinforced until the fear is gone. There is no sin, guilt, or fear, right? But there are steps along the way that get reinforced. My belief and trust in the Holy Spirit gets reinforced, right? My belief in the companionship and help of Jesus gets reinforced with every little step I take. All right? And I learned to lay aside all judgment and ask for only what I really want in every circumstance. And what I really want is to return home, to return to the oneness. So were not each step in this direction so heavily reinforced, it would be hard indeed. And finally, paragraph 8, and finally, there is a period of achievement. It is here that learning is consolidated. Now, what was seen as merely shadows before becomes solid gains, to be counted on in all emergencies as well as tranquil times. Indeed, the tranquility is their result. The outcome of honest learning, consistency of thought, and full transfer. This is the stage of real peace. For here is heaven's state fully reflected. From here, the way to heaven is open and easy. In fact, it is here. Who would go anywhere if peace of mind is already complete? And who would seek to change tranquility for something more desirable? What could be more desirable than this? All right. This is that final stage. All right. That period of achievement when everything I have learned, every time I've asked, help me to see correctly. All right. I consolidate all that into one, and I do see everything with corrected perception. All right? Now what was merely shadows, they become solid gains. All right? To be counted on in all emergencies, as well as in tranquil times. So in other words, I can transfer, I can generalize my learning onto every situation now, because I have reached the top. All right? And indeed, the tranquility is their result. Right? That's the outcome of honest learning, is that tranquility, that peace that passes all understanding, as St. Paul said. The outcome of honest learning, consistency of thought, and full transfer. I can generalize it to everything. Everyone is either calling for love or extending love. And the answer and the response is love. It just surrounds me. All right? That doesn't mean I can't act out in the world, because whatever I do, however I respond in the world, will be coming from that love. No matter what the form, no matter what form it takes. All right? I may be giving somebody directions. Right? I may be handing a couple of dollars to somebody. Whatever comes up, right? You've been able to transfer your learning, right? That you are part of the oneness. You could transfer that to every situation. Because at this point, we're still in what the Course would call the real world, where people could see you, right? But you know that you're part of the oneness. And indeed, the tranquility is their result. Right? This is the stage, paragraph 8, sentence 5. This is the stage of real peace. For here is heaven's state fully reflected. Jesus was reflecting heaven's state. Right? The state of oneness, the state of love. From here, the way to heaven is open and easy. In fact, it's here already. So who would go anywhere if peace of mind is already complete? Who would go anywhere? And who would seek to change tranquility for something more desirable? Is the peace that passes all understanding, is there something more desirable than that? Who would want that? What could be more desirable than this? What could be more desirable than to realize you are that? You are that. When you have practiced and learned enough, rising up the ladder of trust. Trust in the oneness, trust in Jesus and Holy Spirit. All right. And once we get to that state, all the other characteristics just blossom automatically. They're there. And in the next few lessons, we will go over those characteristics that pop up along with the ultimate development of trust, the ultimate realizing that you are that. You are the reflection of heaven. Okay, thank you. And I will see you in the next session. Bye now.